if a vampire could or did exist, what would a vampire society look like? Because the myth, the flags of, gee, hey, Mom, our new vampire, Mr. Smith, he's worked the night shift for the past 35 years. And he's always so polite about asking to come into the house before. They would just be red flags vampires would be found out about.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast Homespun Script. I'm your host, Nate Knispel. With me today is Jeffrey Yorio, author of several flash fiction short stories and poems, as well as the vampire-inspired horror fiction series Sundowners. Today, we will be discussing the first book in the series, Sundowners, Vampires Are Only Human. Released in 2020 and set primarily in present-day society, the novel tracks a development in the power structure amongst two vampire factions who, at the beginning of the novel, enjoy an uneasy truce. The strange disappearance of a major player disturbs the already shaky foundation of this truce, as both factions desperately race to find out what has happened. Here's Jeffrey reading from the novel.
Her projection appeared on the wall, in a red dress with green trim, speaking with her voice. Maybe you were right after all, dear. Yes, Zephyrin, Gina is here, always ready to answer your beck and call. Now, what would you have of Gina? Gina, why do you always appear in that dress? Why, to remind you of your destructive nature towards clothes. I could appear wearing nothing if you wanted, but at your age, that might be dangerous. Zephyrin chuckled at her comment. Gina, please seize Mr. Darnay's has paid his proper fee and then cancel him as my personal financial advisor and hire Delio SPA of Rome to replace him. Gina will see to it, dear. Is there anything else? As I remember, I have no meetings or other important items to sink my teeth into. That's correct. Zeffy is only left with idle imagination and obsessing. For dinner tonight, they'll have moussaka and liver tartare with a medium spicy blood sauce and salad with Russian dressing. To drink, an Italian semi-dry red Cinzano, and for dessert, a pistachio halva with blood pudding. Very good choices, Zephyrin. Zena will place the order for 7 p.m.
So, Jeffrey, thanks for joining me. Pleasure to talk with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I was, as I like to say it, I'm 41 with almost 24 years of experience.
I know the feeling.
And I was born in Corning, New York, last millennium. Mm-hmm. And my dad being a podiatrist, he had relocated his practice to the Rochester area, which then later on brought the family up there in the early 70s. And I've pretty much been in the Rochester area since, except for when I went to college in Ashland, Ohio. Mm-hmm. I'm a BS of education, major in comprehensive social studies and history out of college. Couldn't find a teaching position. And went into business, ended up getting a master's in operations management, and then taking a little early retirement. And one day, I'm downstairs reading the book, the TV's on, and my wife goes over and looks, and she goes, "You read a lot of that stuff. Maybe you should write a book." So blame her.
I take it you were watching or reading.
And although Sundowners was not the first book I started writing. It's the one that, because of the question in the chat box for my writing group, it just took over until I could get it finished.
Oh, okay.
And then I had material left over and then came out with the second book, which picks up after the first.
So more specifically, how did Sundowners, the series, come to be?
I was reading about vampires. In a sense, I've read a few vampire stories. The original classic by Stoker. I read a couple in a series by Fred Saberhagen. One of them, the title I remember, was The Holmes Dracula File. I read Octavia Butler's Fledgling.
Oh, yeah.
And, I found them all interesting and unique. And as far as where the idea came from, in my writing group at Legend Fire, there's a chat box. And one of the questions came up is, where did the myth of the vampire come from? And I said, well, maybe back in the day, rabies might have been what people thought was vampirism until science knew what rabies actually was or did. People who get rabies are paler in the skin, they don't like the sun. Animals associated with rabies, rats, bats, and wolves, same as ones associated with vampires. So I just within there. But that led me into thinking, if a vampire could or did exist, what would a vampire society look like? Because the myth, the flags of, gee, hey, Mom, our new vampire, Mr. Smith, he's worked the night shift for the past 35 years, and he's always so polite about asking to come into the house before. They would just be red flags vampires would be found out about. So I went through the process there of trying to say, how could I have a vampire that adheres to most of the myth, but yet is not the myth? Because in my mind, they created the myth for themselves to protect themselves. My dad, before he passed away, was a retired podiatrist. And I can Google and stuff and get answers and research. So I sat with my dad after a while and just picked his brain about blood and strength and a whole mess of stuff like that. And in reading about Vlad Dracula of Clan Draculesta, that's the historical person that the book Dracula was based on. It was also called Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler. There was some little debate that he might have been, based on drawings and some stuff recorded, he might have been an anemic. They don't know, but maybe. So I started reading up about that, went back to my dad, and so I based my vampires are a mutation of anemia.
Okay.
And I tied some other things to it. So there's no magic, there's no pact with the devil. They're their own little mutated subrace of humans. And then once I had a vampire, now I have to have a history and a story to go along with it, because the vampire isn't the story, it's the idea for the story.
Okay.
I'm a history major out of college. I love using history when I write stories to the extent that I can. And I wanted to make it believable. I remember that Samuel Clemens had says the biggest difference between fiction and nonfiction is that fiction has to be believable. And I adhere to that. A reader will forgive, in my mind, many things if it comes to a little spelling mistake here or a little slip or something on the technical side. A reader will forgive that. But you make a mistake as far as bringing up the believability of your story, that they'll have a hard time with. So if it's not believable, that takes it out of maybe a straight out fiction story into maybe a fantasy story. And I wanted to write, well, yes, it's vampire, it's paranormal, it's fiction, but I wanted to make it true, or at least as true as I could.
Yeah. Or at least have some kind of maybe scientific, or let's just call it a scientific basis for what we generally conceive of as a vampire. And here you have the, I've seen this before as well, which is interesting. I think Peter Watts did it in, it was a science fiction novel he wrote called Blindside. And he explained the aversion that a certain segment of the population has toward crosses. He based it in an article from Nature on people who have an ocular aversion to right angles. And so that would extend, of course, beyond a cross. But it was interesting how he did that. So yeah, it's not unprecedented, but the way you work it in with having a certain kind of anemia, and also leukemia works its way in here as well, doesn't it?
Well, I thought it did. It made sense. I'd say I researched about strength muscles. My dad helped there, fast twitch and slow twitch. And how I made the anemia mutation help their immune system. It differed from in a regular anemic, your white blood cells are immature. They don't help. My mutation is their mature white blood cells. So they help the immune system. You still are anemic. You have that white blood cell, red blood cell imbalance. So you have that issue. but you'll recover from cuts and bruises and other things quicker because you have a
Mm-hmm.
higher mature white blood cell count. You will be more resistant to maybe getting sick or having diseases and stuff like that for the same reason.
Mm-hmm.
I tied the fast twitch muscle to the mutation to the of anemia because fast twitch and slow twitch are your two muscle types. They're basically identical in except how they function.
Mm-hmm.
The slow twitch is what just about everybody has. That's the endurance type muscle. You can do something 6, 8, 10 hours a day, and you're tired, but you're not tuckered. And the fast twitch, the way my dad explained it to me, is imagine a cheetah. It can go 60 miles an hour to catch its prey, but then it's tuckered. It's their tongue hanging out, recovering from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how, so I attach that. That makes them stronger. They can jump more, do other things, but they get tired. In addition to the B vitamin imbalance, somewhat inherent with anemia.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that tied in together, I also, that blood has been used in cooking for several thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, pig, chicken, ox, stuff like that, not human, but it's still been used. Why? Well, blood is a source of protein and other stuff. I even learned that there are some 5-star restaurants in New York City and a couple in Los Angeles that advertise as that they use blood in their food services.
Mm-hmm.
And then what foods do we have commonly that are with blood? Blood sausages, blood pancakes. The two most common, we all know about that.
Yeah, I've had blood sausage several times, but I have not heard of blood pancakes.
Yeah,
Please elaborate on what a blood pancake is.
Yeah, it's more Norway, Sweden, in that area. That's where it comes from. But yes, it's there. There's blood pudding as well. And some others which are there, but it's still used. It's not harmful to anyone or anything,
Right. Yeah.
but it's been used over time, and with developments in science, they were able to get away from the direct requirement to consume blood. And the fangs became an evolutionary form of a dew claw that dogs have. No longer really needed. Because a fang isn't a straw. It couldn't be a straw to do its job because its job is a neck opener. I got to open the neck to get to the blood.
Yeah.
Back in the day. So that was the purpose. If I can, so nature, evolution, the fangs weren't needed. Some older vampires, the smell of blood triggers something in their brain, and they go feral. The Danzo de Morto, as I say in the book, the fangs of death. And they get their fix, and they revert back to normal until the next time it comes up.
So this degradation that you're talking about that your vampires go through, they still live an excessively long time compared to human beings. I mean, one of them was 400 years old, I think, in the book, or the older one was 400 years old. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. Agate herself is, I initially say, she's 400 plus years old. If you do the math for some of the other things that have been mentioned, she turns out to be in the area of around 600.
Okay. And then, but at a certain point, some vampires will go through this aging stage of evolution that you mentioned, which is the fangs of death.
Correct. Not every vampire, not everyone, but some do. Yes.
Right. And is this the link? I hadn't heard of Sundowner syndrome before I read your book, and when just Googling Sundowners, the first thing that came up was Sundowner syndrome. And I'm new to this. So if maybe you could explain the link between Sundowner syndrome and this type of dementia or unfortunate evolutionary development that some of these older vampires go through.
My father-in-law, God bless him, passed away due to sundowners, dementia.
Okay.
And during the day, he'd be pretty good. Literally, when the sun would go down or start to go down, that's when there would be changes. He wouldn't recognize my name, who I was, and would slowly, what he did remember got smaller and smaller. And he also became more difficult to manage as it progressed. And so in seeing that progression, I kind of attribute, well, if a vampire had the same thing, what are the good and bad things of a vampire having it? So yes.
A lot of bad things.
In a way, my father-in-law was one of the best people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. Taught me a lot. Was a great person. But yes, he had passed away due to that. So that was where I brought the connection in from that degradation for the vampires.
So it's like a vampire version of Alzheimer's disease.
Correct.
Except they go totally like feral.
Correct.
So yeah. Now also interestingly, of all places to choose as a setting for a vampire showdown, Ohio.
Yes.
It's maybe the least likely place. Why Ohio?
It was. I was thinking about where do I want to set it, and I thought of your common ones: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, like that. And I'm like, wait a minute. If I have a different vampire, and I went back and I looked at the basics for how I've got my book set up: traditionalist, modernist, the detente. And I'm like, you might think that it would be easier to hide amongst 8 million or 6 million people than out in the boonies. And then I thought of a gentleman historically, Ted Krasinski, the Unabomber.
Oh, yeah.
And he lived literally in a cabin in the woods, not connected to anything. And it took forever for them to find him. And so I'm like, well, I'll do something similar. I went to college in Ashland, Ohio. So I said, I know a fair amount about that area. So that's why I said it there. They're trying to hide, although Agate has a different purpose in why she was there, a secondary purpose for being in Ohio, in addition to it's a small little out of the way place that no one's really going to pay much attention to. And so, yeah, just to be different and for a different way to hide.
Yeah, it does make sense. And yeah, the Unabomber connection didn't really dawn on me initially, but yeah, out of the way, away from everybody that could possibly do something like that. So let's look at the social situation that the vampires have for them. We've essentially, we have two essential factions. We have the traditionalists and we have the modernists. Can you maybe talk a little bit about each of these two factions?
The traditionalists feel that because they know if there are 500,000 vampires worldwide, that might be a high point. So they know there's a humongous numerical disadvantage if the secret comes out. And both sides assume the secret at some point will come out as far as to the general public. So the traditionalists go, wait a minute. We are the next step in human evolution. Just like Neanderthal was the next step over Cro-Magnon, we are the next step over Neanderthal. So our purpose is to dominate and control them so that we are at the top of the food chain and are the rulers of everything. The modernists go, no, you're out of your freaking minds because we are outnumbered 10, 12 to 1. We will cease to exist if they find out about us and what you're trying to do. And so there's the basic set difference between them. The modernists want to say just peacefully in the shadows coexist within regular human society. Don't draw attention to yourselves. Obviously, we have to take care of what happens if anyone does go feral. We don't want the secret out, and the better the technology becomes, the easier that could become too problematic. So there's the basic difference. It's hinted at in the first book, a little bit more in the second book, but the vampires did have, a long time ago, their own civil war over this issue. It was never resolved in the Civil War. That Civil War has a human name called the 100 Years' War.
Yep. Okay. I was wondering if it was parallel to the actual 100 Years' War.
Right. Well, as I say, vampires have learned to manipulate. I you know, you had also brought up a thing, I believe it was, about why are this one side in America more so and the other side in Europe.
It struck me as interesting that the traditionalists are in the New World or America, and the modernists are more in the Old World or Europe.
That is saying the history I created. The traditionalists wanted they even after the their own civil war, they wanted their own place to call their own. So just like the Puritans from England, the Catholics from England who went to the colony of Maryland, and the Puritans who went to Massachusetts, they emigrated to the New World. Now, there are vampires worldwide. There's vampires in Africa, Asia, the Pacific Islands, and yes, but the majority of vampires are in two locations. Your Western Central Europe, like from the Urals over to Portugal and Scandinavia down to Northern Africa, that section, or in the United States and Canada. Not that, but those two locations probably account for 65% of the vampire population. And the others have just developed and lived within their own cultures and never really felt much of a need to do it. The two ruling groups, the American Vampire Council and the Council of Princes, they don't rule anything much more than the others, but because those are the two big boys in the political world for vampires, what they do always draws attention and is listened to, but is not. They can't or don't order others around because they know that if they tried to do that, that would also vampires do have a kind of an independent streak. If we choose to follow you, hey, great, happy to be part of your team, but don't tell us to be part of your team.
Yeah, they seem to wield a kind of indirect power over the human population, though. Not political power, but like the vampire faction in America, at least, has a lot of economic power insofar as they own, which I found amusing, Sanguine Industries.
Yeah.
That was clever.
Yeah.
Which I think is a pharmaceutical company, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. But the literal translation is sanguine, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's the word sanguine.
Sure. Clever.
So So yes, they have their fingers into a lot of different things because of the accumulated wealth. Back in the day, you would have, my name is Lord Tennyson Alfred Bontes II. And you'd also, there was a third and there was a fourth, and the pictures drawn of them, they look very much alike. Well, when didn't have things, and back in the day when going 75 miles from where you were born was a big deal for travel purposes, it was a lot easier. So the accumulated wealth within the older families was a great because it just kept on being moved. It just the incredible wealth. And so when those groups left to go to the New World as such, they brought their wealth with them.
So you have 2 books out in this series right now, and you have a couple more planned. Is that correct? What can we expect from those?
Yes. I have an alternate history set in World War II of an Italian invasion of the island of Malta in 1940.
Cool. And
I also have a space opera where, although humans are there, they're not the initial main focus of the story. It's human-like. Imagine a story set in Star Trek where you're not talking about the Terran Confederation, but you're more worried about the Romulans, the Andorians, and the Klingons as the primary participants before the humans get in. But, they're there. They're just not the primary focus.
Okay. And this, the alternate history with the Italian invasion of Malta, is that part of the Sundowners series, or is that a completely separate thing?
They're both totally separate. They're both into regular science fiction and all. I'm working on my third Sundowners book. That's got about 4,000 or 5,000 words into it. And I have one which is titled, it's called Light of the Silvery Moon. It's a witch, warlock, lichen, and gargoyle story.
Mm-hmm. Is that part of the Sundowners universe as well, or again?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. You got a lot of fire, a lot of irons in the fire right now.
Yeah, and I'm sure glad we have a 30-hour day for me to get to everything.
I know the feeling. Cool. So, what can we expect as the Sundowner series develops? We've got a second book that's out and a third in the works.
Okay. The second book picks up literally 6 to 8 months after the first one ends.
Mm-hmm.
I introduce a new antagonist, tie up some loose ends from the first book, and you find out that Agate has been keeping a lot of secrets from people.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, it's like not telling them
Mm-hmm.
stuff that would be considered important to
Mm-hmm.
each individual. And those start coming out in the second book because it all starts like a domino. One secret
Mm-hmm.
falls, and then the rest start going with it. And it causes relationship problems with her.
Mm-hmm.
And alliances change a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Is the enemy of my enemy my friend, or just my ally to work with a little bit?
Always a difficult question. Brings up the issue of trust. Yeah, I could see that happening at the end of the first book, where the seeming enemies are a crucial fact that I'm not going to give away gets revealed.
Yep.
Another player comes into the works, and just so we're familiar, just so everybody knows, I don't hope I'm not giving away too much here, but it's revealed fairly early on that Agate, who is the old vampire who is one of the main players in the whole situation, she develops the fangs of death or dementia. And so both factions decide, all right, we have to find out what is going on with her. We have to either do what they do with vampires who have this sort of dementia or fangs of death, and that differs substantially. So, yeah, and she's still around in the second and third books then, is she?
She's around in the second book.
Okay. Maybe in the third. We don't know yet.
Maybe
in some
the
capacity.
third, but she is around in the second book. And what I'm doing for the third book is I'm trying to be a little interactive with it, at least for those who had read the first two books. Something is set up in the third book that if A doesn't happen, B will happen. Well, A doesn't happen, so B does happen. And that leads to, in the beginning, an interactive type thing where if a person has read the first two books, they may be able to answer the same questions that are posed to a new person, a new character, in the beginning of the third book.
Okay. So is this going to incite a bit of rereadability in the first two? Are we going to read them differently after reading the third? Or is it just information?
No. I mean, if that person answers the questions, they gain access to some information.
Okay. Gotcha.
So it may be a case of, oh, I know the answer to this. It's not too much a follow along, but something to, pique the interest. Geez, I've read one, I've read two. I thought great of them, and I'm like, wait a minute, I know this. I know this and this. Just to be a little different and involve the reader into the story.
Yeah.
And that's what's given me the initial problem, setting up that scene and making sure that if you had read both books, that the reader could answer the question. So when I when I have the question posed to the person, I have to make sure that I got the answer already written in the earlier two books. That takes time to go through. I use Word 365. It's great for me as far as the writing of the book, but it's hard for me to find certain information. That's why I keep a copy of each of my books around so that I can easier to go back because I have a rough idea where to look for the answer. I just have to make sure it's there. But yeah, that's what I'm trying to do in the third book. Depending on how the third book ends, there may be a fourth book.
Okay.
And then I'd even thought of down the road, depending on how overly popular the series 3 or 4 books was, to do something along the lines of with a rough title called Friends of Sundowners, where I would open up the world of Sundowners for people to write their own story set in Sundowners.
Oh, okay. So an invitation for fan fiction in a way.
In a way, fan fiction, but with the look of publishing it. You ever remember from the early 70s a series of books called, oh no, I'm drawing a blank. Robert Asprin wrote it. It was fantasy series, and it was a world sanctuary. And they set up a city and had like 6 or 7 authors create a character, and they could use other characters within certain rules and set it up. So I liked that concept. So I was thinking of something along those lines.
Oh yeah, like a communally constructed world.
Yes.
Yeah, that's much more interesting than simple fan fiction. You're right.
Right. And I mean, technically it would be fan fiction. I don't dislike fan fiction. Maybe I've, not as popular as I could be, hope to be. Let's say it that way. Hope to be. But people have always said, "Do you think fan fiction is writing?" I mean, yes, fan fiction is writing.
Absolutely.
They may be taking a established world, but they put their own characters, which they spent time creating, and their own storyline into it. I mean, if someone was to write fan fiction about Sundowners, I'd be kind of flattered at it. Now, I don't know all the legal parameters around it, but the fact that someone thought so much of my series to go do this, that's flattering.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you on that. Yeah, and I imagine there are some authors who might think, well, don't take don't take my creation. This is my creation, and
right. No, and that's not wrong either.
Right.
There is no wrong with that. It's how you, as an author, approach fan fiction. Because I can see both sides of the coin.
Yeah. I think encouraging fan fiction at this amplified level you're proposing is, I think it just inspires creativity all the way around. And I don't see any sort of negative consequences from it. I mean, there might be legal issues as well, but legal issues oftentimes stifle creativity. And yeah, that's a messy,
yeah,
messy topic when you get right down to it. But so you are you self-published right now, or are you through an independent press?
I'm self-published. They're on Amazon. You can order them online through Barnes & Noble online. You can also get ebooks at Smashwords and Kobo Plus.
Okay, cool. So how did you, I've gotten all manner of answers as to why people chose to self-publish. What was your journey here, and why did you choose to self-publish, and how was the experience?
I had the first book all done, and I said, well, let me send it out to some agents and see what we got. And so I don't remember how many I sent it out to, but I remember only 2 got back to me, and they both said basically the same thing. Gee, your book's only 48,000 words. That's too short for us. Thank you, bye. And I'm like, okay. It's technically not a novella. At least the Science Fiction Writers of America consider 40,000 or more words a book, a novel. And I'm thinking of all the novellas that have been written through time that you have real famous, Lord of the Flies, I Am Legend, A Christmas Carol.
Sure. Oh yeah.
All novellas. But I'm going, wait a minute, this is still a business for an agent and for a publisher, and the cost to set up to print a book is going to be the same for 48,000 as it is for 108,000. But they can only, a 48,000 word book can only sell for X, and the 108 can sell for more. So I understand it. Hey, they have a business; they're out to make money as well. So it was after that I decided to self-publish the first book. Second book gets done. I send it out to a number of them. One agent got back to me and says, "Gee, Mr. Yorio, thank you very much, but this is the second book of the series. We're not interested."
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It was an unfortunate aspect of the publishing business and the publishing world. But one of those things is just the reality of the situation, and we all have to deal with it in some capacity if we're writers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I looked at the cover of the first book, Sundowners, Vampires Are Only Human, is fantastic. And although I haven't read the second book yet, I did see the cover, and it's also quite good. How did you go about acquiring cover art?
My wife and I were searching online for free pictures that you can use for a book cover or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and she found the link to the gentleman Juan J. Padron, and we went to his site, and
Mm-hmm.
his site was very reasonably priced.
Mm-hmm.
We found in each case we found the cover for each book at his site. I asked him to make a couple little tweaks and how I
Mm-hmm.
wanted the writing for the first cover.
Mm-hmm.
No problem. And so I purchased it, and similar
Mm-hmm.
with the second one.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
And
because they look
I
really
do
good.
have him on the. I don't know if it's on the inside cover, but he is down there at I think it's juanjpadron.com
Mm-hmm.
as far as for to access him.
Mm-hmm. Give him some credit. Cool. So, yeah, is there any advice that you would give to authors who are maybe thinking of going in this direction of self-publishing?
Do your research. Every author has different strengths. Most are
Mm-hmm.
at the writing end, but maybe you have a strength in publishing or speaking or whatever. But do your research so you know everything that's involved. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
knew there was a marketing aspect to putting the book out, but I knew nothing about it. So I went
Mm-hmm.
in very cold feet to marketing my own books.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned a lot since, but yeah, so know what your strengths and weaknesses are in the self-publishing end. So you can control. It's better to control your expenses.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know your book is going to need at least a line edit.
Mm-hmm.
It might need a developmental edit. You're definitely
Mm-hmm.
going to want that editing at the end, a cover picture. Can you write a blurb? Can you write a synopsis? So know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and also get involved with the writing group, be it online or local. You
Okay.
will be able to get a lot of support from your group. The Legend Fire writing group I'm a member of is fantastic uh,
Mm-hmm.
as far as support and helping you improve your craft of writing
Mm-hmm.
and whatever you're most comfortable with. If you're more comfortable with a local writing group that meets, then do that. Online,
Mm-hmm.
do that. Um, a library would be a very good place to check for writer groups. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you have a self-published book, check with your library to see if they'll carry it. Mine does carry
Mm-hmm.
both my books.
Oh, that's really cool.
Um, and all. So just it's not. Don't let the mountain scare you.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that the mountain is there, how are you going to get around it? Not so
Mm-hmm.
much over it, but get past it.
Getting around it sounds like a good strategy to me as well. Yeah, I've heard. Yeah, a common theme has been self-publishing involves like 50% actually writing and then 50% promotion in the business side of things. So it's a big task to
Yeah,
tackle.
if you there's a element of publishing which I did not know, or marketing,
Mm-hmm.
whereas it's okay to start marketing your book before it's finished.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a more business background, and so how can you can't market a car if it's not ready for sale. You can't market what can you market? Oh, you can do those little teaser ones with the cover over the car and see, February 3rd, you will see the new Buick, or you can do that, but you still have to
Yeah,
have it
yeah,
to tease them.
yeah.
But no, as I found out, you can start doing, like TikTok videos or little promo things that you got it out. And that makes perfect sense for writing because you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to build that interest so that when the book is available, um, do it. Like people like to have cover reveal parties.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Maybe a special thing if you pre-order the book on my website. Mine
Mm-hmm.
can't be done for that. But if
Right.
you pre-order the book, you'll get some goodies and stuff like that, and that's all
Sure.
fine. I've seen some people do Kickstarters or Patreon pages for their book. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. So I've learned that you can free market before you have a finished product, but you also know you're going to have a finished product and pretty much what it's going to look like when you start.
Okay. Yeah. Is there also an element of motivation, or let's just call it artificial motivation or self-accountability, when you tell everyone, yes, I'm going to have this book out?
Oh, it's definitely. It's like, for me, if I see the cover of a book, I expect that cover to somehow relate to the book. Not necessarily as a scene in the book, but it may be an overarching theme or a story. Okay. And when it's not, I get disappointed.
Yeah.
The back blurb, how does that entice me? Good cover, I'm reading that back cover. Guaranteed.
Yeah.
So if those are a little bit off, I get a little bit disappointed because of a potential, it's one thing to hook me, it's another to trick me. And also I look at it that way. So yes, there is a danger that it's definitely a accountability aspect in writing. Poor writing can be improved on. There's where the writing group comes in, and there's where just experience comes in. Experience writing and experience reading to make yourself a better writer. You have to do both, and so that's my most difficult thing to balance, is between how much do I write, how much do I read. That's my hardest part to balance.
I'm right there with you. I know the feeling there. Yeah. Back to on the covers. I remember it was a fun game that my friends and I used to play when we were reading novels, specifically 90s, early 2000s, before the massive advent of the Kindle. Was we would guess whether or not the cover artist had actually read the book, because that used to be kind of an issue where the cover just had nothing to do with the book, or it gave away way too much. And it's interesting because that's much less of a problem now, because authors have, especially in the self-publishing world, where authors have so much more say in what the cover is going to be like. All right, Jeffrey, it's been wonderful talking with you. And so when can we expect the third installment of Sundowners to come out?
At this point, that you're probably looking at 3 or 4 years, maybe down the road.
Okay.
I've got the science fiction stuff, which I'm going to put out first, and then I'll get to finishing up my two whips and get them out. So I'm thinking 3 or 4 years down the road as far as the Sundowners go, and I hope to get my stuff, the science fiction stuff, which is next on deck, out next year. And we'll see how close I am to hitting that target.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you, and I wish you all the best as an author and all the success that you deserve. So thank you for coming in. And been great having you here. I don't know what else to say.
Oh, hey, thank you very much, Nathan. And I hope that your followers who tune in and enjoy it as well.
Yep. Okay, great. Once again, it's Jeffrey Yorio. His book, Sundowners, Vampires Are Only Human, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and where else?
You can get the ebook at Smashwords or Kobo Plus.
Smashwords. Cool. All right. Cool. Well, we'll be talking soon, Jeffrey. Thanks again.
Okay. Thank you, Nathan. Have a good day.
You too.